Tariq Solano stood tall, wrists bound in cold maglocks, the noose of grav rope tight around his throat. The plaza of Eshar-Prime, capital of the Galactic Council, was silent. The kind of silence that came before storms, before battles, before revolutions. Above him, massive banners of the Council fluttered in the artificial breeze, their golden insignia shining beneath the cold lights of a world that had forgotten justice. Thousands of aliens, council delegates, military officials, civilians filled the tiered balconies surrounding the execution platform. They were here to watch, to make a lesson of him, to show Earth its place. Tariq did not look at them. He did not look at the towering Zaldari executioner beside him, nor the high-ranking Va'adi bureaucrats who had sentenced him. His gaze remained fixed on the 3 cameras floating before him, broadcasting this spectacle to every human in the Sol system. He felt the rope constrict slightly as the platform adjusted beneath his feet. His body knew fear, but his mind was steel. They had captured him during peace talks, dragged him from the negotiation chamber when he demanded justice for humanity's colonies, for the unprovoked strikes on their trade routes. They had laughed when he spoke of sovereignty, of diplomacy, and now they were going to kill him for it. A deep, resonant voice echoed through the plaza as the Zaldari executioner spoke, its reptilian maw curling into something between a sneer and a snarl. Tariq Solano, representative of Earth, you stand guilty of unchecked expansion, defiance of council rulings, and the disruption of galactic stability. Humanity has ignored our warnings, challenged our authority. Today, let this serve as an example. There will be no more violations. Tariq exhaled, slow and measured. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Somewhere, his people were watching. His family. The soldiers who would one day march in his name. He was not afraid of death. He was afraid that humanity would hesitate, that they would bow their heads and accept this, that they would forgive. A sudden, sharp pull yanked the rope against his throat as the executioner reached for the control switch. Tariq felt the grav rope hum with energy, ready to snap his neck the moment the field activated. The cameras zoomed in. The entire Sol system watched. This is it. Tariq inhaled deeply, lifted his head, and stared directly into the lens. We will remember this. The executioner pulled the lever. The platform beneath him vanished. The grav rope surged, twisting his body in the artificial gravity, his breath caught in his throat. A sharp crack rang out as his neck snapped instantly. The crowd roared. Cheers erupted from the balconies. Applause rippled through the gathered officials. Council delegates smiled, their arrogance shining through as they celebrated the death of a man who had dared to stand against them. But beyond Eshar-Prime, across the void of space, on a blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, a different silence fell. Billions of humans watched as the image of Tariq Solano, broken and hanging, burned itself into history. Fists clenched, jaws tightened, mothers wept, fathers seethed, soldiers reached for their rifles. In that moment, humanity understood what had to be done. Tariq Solano had not died in vain. He had died to light a fire. In the war rooms of Earth's military command, the highest-ranking generals stood unmoving as the broadcast ended. Their orders had already been prepared, sealed away in encrypted channels, waiting for the day diplomacy failed. One man, his voice cold and absolute, turned to his officers. Unleash hell. And across the Sol system, every warship, every colony, every soldier received the same single command. No quarter, no surrender, burn the council to the ground. What would you do if the entire galaxy thought it could erase your people with one act? Would you choose vengeance or annihilation? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're loving this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more epic HFY tales humanity remembers, and now the galaxy will too. The war began before the Galactic Council could react. They had expected outrage, perhaps an embargo, a strongly worded protest. What they received instead was fire and death. Earth, high orbit, UNS Retribution, flagship of the human armada. Admiral Elias Caney stood on the bridge of the UNS Retribution, his gaze fixed on the glowing, holographic map of the galaxy before him. Red markers, targets, blinked in rapid succession. Council embassies, military outposts, strategic hubs. Every major alien power who had sat in silence as Tariq Solano was murdered was now marked for obliteration. He inhaled deeply. His voice, when it came, was like steel meeting stone. Execute Sol War Doctrine. 0 hour begins now. Across the fleet, thousands of officers and crews snapped into motion. Orders were dispatched, weapons primed, coordinates locked, and then, as if the hand of God had descended upon the stars, humanity struck. Eshar-Prime, Galactic Council capital, 12 hours after the execution. The council chamber was in chaos. The Va'adi chancellor screeched into the HoloNet, demanding an explanation. The Zaldari warlord beside him slammed a clawed fist onto the table, mandibles clicking in barely contained fury. Other species, some reptilian, some avian, some silicon-based, chattered in a cacophony of panicked voices. Something was wrong. Every emergency channel was filled with the same terrifying words, repeating over and over. Humanity has declared war. The embassies are gone. The fleets, they're coming. High Counselor Varric, the oldest among them, rose slowly from his seat. His pale, sunken eyes flickered toward the massive display that dominated the chamber. It showed the burning remains of a Zaldari fortress world, the first casualty of humanity's wrath. The feed was filled with screaming. Varric felt an unfamiliar sensation crawl up his spine. Dread. We have underestimated them. The first strike. Zaldari Prime Captain Lin Wei of the UNS Revenant stared at the world beneath her, a jewel of deep jungles and crystalline oceans, home to over 7 billion Zaldari, the same species that had looped a noose around Solano's throat. No hesitation, no mercy. All ships, fire at will. The sky burned. Kinetic rods, each the size of a skyscraper, descended like meteors, hitting with the force of nuclear warheads. Entire cities vanished in an instant. Shockwaves rolled across continents, shattering mountains and boiling seas. The night turned to fire. Some Zaldari tried to flee, launching thousands of ships into the sky, desperate to escape. But the fleet was waiting. Human warships cut through the exodus like wolves among lambs. No one got out. This was not conquest. This was retribution. The fall of the Va'adi. The Va'adi, bureaucratic cowards who had signed the execution order, thought themselves untouchable. Their homeworld was a fortress, protected by fleets, planetary shields, and defense grids designed over centuries. It lasted exactly 37 minutes. The first human stealth teams had infiltrated the planet days before. As the invasion began, the shields failed from within. Anti-orbital cannons refused to fire. The planetary defense AI turned against its own people. By the time the Va'adi High Chancellor realized what was happening, human marines were already in his capital. He fled through his palace, breath ragged, robes heavy with sweat. Around him, his elite guards fell one by one, their blue blood staining marble floors. He turned a corner and came face to face with a human soldier. A woman, clad in midnight black armor, raised her rifle. The Chancellor dropped to his knees, hands trembling. "Please," he begged, "we can discuss terms." The Marine tilted her head. Her voice was calm. So could Solano. She pulled the trigger, a single shot. The last ruler of the Va'adi crumpled to the ground. The message sent. Across the stars, within the first 24 hours, humanity had reduced the Galactic Council's military strength by 40%. Entire fleets turned to wreckage. Planets burned, world after world went silent. The survivors, those who had once ruled, once dictated the fate of lesser species, began to understand. This was not retaliation. This was extermination. Across the shattered council network, a transmission played on every channel. A human admiral, standing aboard his command ship, his uniform pristine, his eyes cold. Behind him, through the viewport, a council world burned in real time. His voice was even. Humanity does not negotiate with murderers. You thought we would kneel. You were mistaken. Every council world will burn. Every fleet will fall. There will be no peace, no surrender. Only the cold vengeance of extinction. This is not a war. This is an execution. The feed cut to black, and across the galaxy, the Council's remaining worlds began to pray. The siege did not begin with thunder. There were no warnings, no dramatic declarations of war. It began in silence. A silence so absolute, it strangled the planet before the first human ship arrived. For 3 days, the Vaadi homeworld sat in confusion as their defense networks flickered, their comm channels filled with nothing but static. Their planetary shields, once the pride of their technological superiority, sputtered and failed. And then, the sky turned black. Eshar-Prime, High Council chambers. Chancellor Zirek Vakara stood at the center of the Grand Chamber, his pale green exoskeletal fingers trembling over the console. The feed before him flickered. Tactical displays, urgent reports, distress calls from the outer colonies. None of it mattered anymore. Outside, the sky boiled with fire. Human warships hung in low orbit, casting shadows over entire cities. Their cannons glowed red-hot, primed and ready to erase history with a single command. His advisors screamed, throwing desperate solutions at him. "Send diplomatic signals now," one cried. "Activate planetary shields," another shouted. Zirek turned, mandibles clicking in fury. "The shields are down. They've sabotaged us from within." His voice cracked, thick with disbelief. "We are already dead, and you still want to negotiate." His vision blurred as the room shook, a tremor, distant, yet impossibly heavy. Something had hit the surface. The humans had arrived. UNS Revenant, low orbit above Eshar-Prime. Captain Lin Wei stood on the bridge, hands clasped behind her back, eyes fixed on the war-torn world below. Her voice was calm when she spoke. "Begin ground deployment." Across the planet, sleek, black drop pods pierced the atmosphere like daggers. Each carried a soldier, a single highly trained human warrior, and there were 1,000,000 of them. Eshar-Prime, capital city, Zirak's Fall. The first explosion shattered the grand spire of Zirak's Fall, the central capital of Eshar-Prime. The second brought down the council chambers. The third marked the end of the Vaadi as rulers of the galaxy. Human marines stormed through the streets with the relentless efficiency of machines. Their armor, matte black, absorbed the neon glow of the alien skyline. Their rifles whispered death in bursts of blue light. Vaadi soldiers, trained for negotiations and ceremonial defenses, broke within minutes. Some tried to hold the line. They were the first to die. Some tried to run. They died slower. And some, the smart ones, threw down their weapons and prayed. The prayers went unanswered. The fall of the High Chancellor, Zirek Vakara's legs trembled as he fled through the shattered halls of his palace. His once pristine robes, embroidered with golden sigils of 1,000 years of Vaadi rule, were stained with dust and blood. The echoes of gunfire grew closer. His guards, his protectors, his elite warriors, were dead, their lifeless bodies strewn along the marble floors. He turned a corner and froze. A single human stood before him. She was tall, broad-shouldered. Her armor, dark and scarred, bore no insignia, no rank. The only thing that stood out was the rifle in her hands, steady, unwavering. Zirek's mouth opened, his mandibles clicking erratically as he raised trembling hands. "Please," he gasped, We can discuss terms." The human did not move. Her voice was calm, quiet. So could Solano. A single gunshot echoed through the ruined palace, and the last ruler of the Va'adi crumpled, his blood staining the floor beneath him. The aftermath. The siege of Eshar-Prime lasted 37 minutes, a once mighty species, crushed beneath the weight of its own arrogance. Across the galaxy, the broadcast of the Chancellor's death spread like wildfire. The other Council worlds watched in horror as human forces executed every high-ranking official, every military leader, every symbol of the old order. There was no conquest, no negotiation, only judgment. And then, when the executions were done, the human fleet left. They did not occupy Eshar-Prime. They did not claim it as their own. They simply burned the cities to the ground, left the survivors to their ruin, and moved on. Because this was not a war for territory. This was extermination. Would you have stopped after taking revenge? Or would you have gone further, ensuring your enemies never rose again? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're loving this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to HFY Genesis for more thrilling tales. The Galactic Council thought they were untouchable. Now, they were the ones who burned. There should have been a moment of hesitation. A moment where humanity looked at the devastation they had wrought. The burning worlds, the shattered fleets, the billions left to rot in the ruins of their once proud civilizations, and decided that enough was enough. That moment never came. The war did not stop. It could not stop, because humanity did not want peace. UNS Retribution, War Council, 42 hours after the fall of Eshar-Prime. Admiral Elias Caney stood at the center of the dimly lit war chamber, surrounded by the greatest military minds of the Terran Dominion. Generals, fleet commanders, intelligence operatives. Every one of them carried the same expression: a grim, focused determination. Holographic maps hovered before them, detailing the current state of the war. Entire sectors once under Council control now lay in ruin. The remnants of the Galactic Council, fractured and leaderless, were fleeing to the edges of known space. There were no organized defenses left, no standing armies. Just scattered, desperate survivors trying to escape the inevitable. And still, Earth pushed forward. Caney's voice was low, measured. "Next targets?" A young officer gestured, bringing up a list. "We have intercepted distress signals from the Kareen, the Yavak, and the Zinari. All Council-aligned species requesting amnesty." Caney's expression did not change. "And?" The officer hesitated. "We're ignoring them, sir." A silence settled over the room. It was General Cassandra Wolfe who spoke next, arms crossed over her uniform. "Good." No one disagreed, because mercy was no longer an option. This war had begun as vengeance, but now, it was something else. The Zaldari Exodus. The once mighty Zaldari Empire had been reduced to scattered refugee fleets, drifting through the void, searching for anywhere that humanity's shadow did not fall. There was nowhere left to run. A lone Zaldari captain stood on the bridge of his vessel, staring at the cold emptiness ahead. He was young by his people's standards, barely 100 years old. In another life, he might have lived for centuries. But that was before humanity. A sharp ping cut through the silence, a proximity alert. The captain's blood ran cold. They had found him. The viewport flickered as the system AI calculated their chances of survival. Less than 1%. He exhaled slowly, mandibles tightening. Then, with quiet resignation, he reached for the ship's console and activated the self-destruct sequence. Better to die here, on his own terms, than to be another message in humanity's endless war. The last attempt at peace. The few remaining Council diplomats, those who had managed to escape the purge, sent desperate messages to Earth. Pleas for negotiations, promises of reparations, begging for a ceasefire. Every message was ignored. The last transmission sent from the Council's surviving members was a single, desperate question. What do you want? Humanity's response was broadcast across the entire galactic network. Admiral Caney, standing aboard the UNS Retribution, his face carved from stone, his voice devoid of emotion. Everything. And the transmission ended. A war without end. The cycle repeated itself. One by one, the last remnants of the Galactic Council were erased. Every fleet, every planet, every species that had once raised a hand against Earth. Humanity did not conquer. It did not rule. It simply moved forward, like a storm with no end. Somewhere, in the ruins of a forgotten world, a lone survivor whispered a single phrase into the darkness. They won't stop. No one heard him. And even if they had, it wouldn't have mattered. If your enemies begged for mercy after what they had done, would you grant it? Or would you ensure that they could never threaten you again? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you're loving this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more epic HFY tales. The war did not stop. It never would. The last War Council of the Galactic Council convened in a bunker deep beneath the surface of Helios 7, a barren moon chosen as the final stronghold. Their empires had been reduced to ash, their fleets shattered, their armies slaughtered. And still, humanity came. They would not stop. High Counselor Varric, the last surviving original member of the Council, stood at the center of the circular chamber, his withered fingers gripping the edges of the war table. Around him, the few remaining military commanders of the shattered coalition whispered in hushed, panicked tones. The hollow map before them showed the last of their forces, a desperate patchwork fleet gathered from the remnants of 100 dying species. It was the largest armada ever assembled. It would not be enough. Nothing would be enough. A deep silence fell as a transmission request appeared on the table. Varric swallowed hard and accepted it. The screen flickered to life. A human stood there, clad in the midnight black uniform of Earth's War Council. Admiral Elias Caney. Varric had seen him before, in grainy intelligence reports and intercepted transmissions. The architect of this unending war. The human's expression was unreadable. His voice was steel. Your time is up. Varric exhaled slowly. His voice, though steady, carried the weight of despair. Admiral Caney, this war, this destruction, it has gone far beyond vengeance. Surely there must be another way. We will surrender. We will give you whatever you want. Just end this. For a long moment, Caney said nothing. Then his lips curled into something that might have been amusement or pity. Surrender. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze never wavering. You never offered Solano that choice. Varric felt his stomach turn to ice. Before he could reply, the transmission cut to black. The war was decided. Helios 7, outer orbit. The battle begins. The Council's fleet hung in the void, a vast wall of ships stretching across the blackness of space. Thousands of vessels, dreadnoughts, cruisers, battleships assembled in one last desperate stand. The sheer scale of it should have been reassuring. It wasn't, because the enemy had arrived, and the stars themselves seemed to darken. UNS Retribution. Bridge Admiral Caney watched the battle unfold from his command chair, hands clasped behind his back. The Council fleet was massive, but mass was no longer a factor. Humanity did not fight like the others. They did not line up in neat formations, exchanging fire in ritualized combat. They did not fight to win, they fought to exterminate. Sir, an officer reported, the enemy is attempting to establish a defensive line. Caney gave a slow nod. Break it. Across the void, the first human ships accelerated. The end of the Council fleet. The battle lasted 6 hours. The Council fought with the desperation of the damned. They fired everything they had, railguns, plasma lances, antimatter warheads, desperate to hold the line. It did not matter. Humanity's warships, sleek and predatory, wove between the Council's clunky formations with ruthless efficiency. For every human vessel that fell, 10 alien ships were destroyed. Their capital ships, behemoths built to rule the stars, were torn apart by Earth's kinetic kill weapons, precision strikes that shattered entire bridges in a single shot. And when the defenses collapsed, the ground assault began. Helios 7 burned. The final hour. Varek stood in the bunker, listening to the screams echoing through the comm channels. His hands trembled as reports flooded in. The outer defenses breached, the planetary shield failing, human marines advancing. And then, the doors exploded inward. The last survivors of the Galactic Council barely had time to react before the first human soldier stepped into the room. She was tall, her armor blackened from battle. Her rifle hummed with lethal energy. Her eyes were cold. Varek knew it was over. Still, his pride would not let him fall to his knees. Instead, he met her gaze and asked, "What now?" The human did not hesitate. "Now? Now you die." The last transmission. The fall of Helios 7 was broadcast across the galaxy. Every remaining Council world, every hidden fleet, watched as their last leaders were executed in the ruins of their war room. There were no trials, no speeches, only the sound of gunfire, and then silence. If you were humanity, would you have shown mercy at the end, or would you have finished what was started? Let me know your thoughts below. And if you're loving this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thrilling HFY tales. The war was over, but humanity was not finished.
The end had come. The great capital of the Galactic Council, Eshar-Prime, the beating heart of interstellar civilization for 1,000 years, was about to die. It had once been a beacon of power. Its towers of polished obsidian stretched into the sky, a declaration of dominance over the lesser races. Its streets pulsed with alien life, millions of diplomats, bureaucrats, and high officials going about their daily business, confident in their supremacy. Now, the towers burned. The streets were filled with screams, the sky choked with the fire of orbital bombardments. Humanity had arrived, and they had come to finish what had begun with a rope and a warning. UNS Retribution, Command Deck, orbit above. Eshar-Prime Admiral Elias Caney watched the capital world die from the reinforced glass of his command deck. Below him, waves of fire rolled across the planet's surface, devouring entire districts in white-hot kinetic hellfire. It had taken 13 days of orbital bombardment to break through the planetary defenses. That was 13 days longer than Caney had expected. The Council had thrown everything they had left into holding this world, the last of their fleets, their strongest defenses, their most desperate warriors. None of it had mattered. "Status?" he asked, voice calm. A young officer at the hollow table snapped to attention. "Final surface resistance crumbling, sir. Ground forces advancing on the Council chambers. Air support reports minimal enemy interference. Planetary defense grid is offline." Caney exhaled slowly. So this was how it ended. Not with a grand last stand, not with honor. Just another world reduced to glass and ash. Council chambers, the last stand. The Grand Chamber, once the center of galactic law, had become a tomb. Shattered marble pillars lay strewn across the floor. The once proud banners of the Galactic Council, symbols of unity and order, hung in tatters, soaked in blood and dust. High Counselor Varek, the last of the ruling elite, stood alone. The other delegates had fled, or died. The once mighty council, reduced to a single trembling old man. The great doors of the chamber exploded inward. A squad of human marines marched through the smoke, rifles raised, armor scarred from battle. Their leader stepped forward, a woman, tall and broad-shouldered, her face expressionless behind her visor. Varek straightened, forcing his back to remain rigid. 1,000 years of power, 1,000 years of dominion. All of it gone.
He swallowed hard and took a step forward. You could still negotiate, he said, voice weak. Humanity could take its place at the head of the new order. You could be rulers, not destroyers. The Marine tilted her head slightly. Then, she slowly removed her helmet. Her face was young, too young for the death in her eyes. She stared at him for a long moment. Then, her lips curled slightly, not in a smile, but in something darker. We are not here to rule. She raised her sidearm. We are here to end you. The gunshot rang out, sharp and final. The last High Counselor of the Galactic Council slumped to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. The final purge. Across the city, the last remaining leaders of the Council were dragged from their hiding places. The same plaza where Tariq Solano had been executed became a stage once more. There were no trials, no speeches, no appeals. The gallows were raised, and one by one, the architects of humanity's suffering were hanged before the cameras, a message sent across the stars, a warning, a promise, never again. The silence. After the storm. By nightfall, the fires had begun to die. The last screams had faded. The war was over. But there was no victory celebration, no triumph. Only the eerie, heavy silence of a galaxy without its masters. Engagement questions. Would you have stopped at the execution of the Council? Or would you have burned every trace of their empire to the ground? Let me know your thoughts below. And if you're loving this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thrilling HFY tales. Eshar-Prime had fallen, but humanity was not finished.
The Galactic Council was gone. Their fleets, their armies, their leaders wiped from existence. Their great capital, Eshar-Prime, reduced to ash. Their history erased, their legacy burned. The war was over. And yet, humanity did not stop. UNS Retribution, high orbit. Above Eshar-Prime, Admiral Elias Caney stood alone, gazing down at the silent planet below. Fires still smoldered in the ruins of what had once been the most powerful civilization in the known galaxy. The sky was choked with the debris of fallen ships, drifting like the shattered bones of a long-dead god. It should have felt like a victory. It didn't. Behind him, the doors to the command deck slid open. General Cassandra Wolfe stepped inside, her boots clicking against the polished floor. "You're still here," she observed. Caney didn't look at her. Where else would I be? She joined him at the viewport, arms crossed. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, she sighed. "The war's over, Elias." Caney exhaled through his nose. "Is it?" She frowned. "The Council is dead. Every major fleet is gone. There's nothing left to fight." Caney turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Look out there, Cass." He gestured to the void beyond. "There's always something left to fight." She followed his gaze and saw what he meant. The galaxy had not fallen silent. It had become something else, fractured, lawless, wild. With the Council gone, entire sectors had collapsed into chaos. Old grudges, long buried under the weight of the Council's authority, erupted into new wars. Species that had once served the Council now turned on each other, scrambling for territory, for resources, for survival. And amidst it all, humanity's fleets still moved. They were no longer just soldiers, they were hunters. Extinction had become their purpose. The scars of war in the shattered remains of the Zaldari homeworld. Refugees huddled in the ruins of their cities, whispering in terror whenever the sky darkened. They had surrendered. They had pleaded for mercy. They had been ignored. A Zaldari elder, once a high-ranking general, crouched beside a group of survivors, his aged hands trembling as he whispered, "They won't stop." A young hatchling looked up at him, wide-eyed. "But the war is over." The elder swallowed hard. Not for them. The hunt continues. Across the galaxy, human warships continued their relentless advance. No longer constrained by strategy, by treaties, by diplomacy, they operated on one doctrine alone:
If they fought us, they die. Entire species, once proud and mighty, now lived in fear of the black-armored fleets that moved through the void like vengeful wraiths. It was no longer about justice, no longer about revenge. It was about ensuring that no one, no species, no empire, no civilization would ever threaten humanity again. And so, the war never ended. It simply became the way things were. The last words of a doomed empire. A final transmission, sent from a dying world, echoed across the void. They are not conquerors. They are not rulers. They are the reckoning of the stars. And across the galaxy, those words were spoken in whispers, in screams, in prayers. Humanity does not forgive. Humanity does not forget. And humanity does not stop. Engagement. Questions. If you were humanity, could you stop? Should you? Or would you ensure that the galaxy would never challenge you again? Let me know your thoughts below. And if you're loving this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thrilling HFY tales. The war was never truly over because humanity had become the storm.